On Bio, presented in HD where available.
George Michael had disbanded Wham at the peak of their success and had become one of the biggest artists in the world with the release of the album Faith. But the exhausting process of promotion and touring had been testing for him, and more personal matters were starting to come to the fore.
By then I realized that I wasn't bisexual, I was gay. And I'd really come to that realization right at the beginning of the whole Faith period, you know. So that was weighing on me very heavily by then, because I didn't, you know, I wasn't a liar, but I was in a situation where I was so high profile. And on top of that, I think I was struggling with the beginnings of depression, which is in my family, but I didn't acknowledge that it might be something actually chemical for many years.
George started writing his second solo album, Listen Without Prejudice. Naturally, for one of the biggest artists in the world, the anticipation was immense. But when the record was released in 1990, George, still scarred by the Faith promotion experience, decided to take a back seat.
When I heard that George wasn't going to be active in the promotion of Listen Without Prejudice, I just thought, uh-oh.
I could have toured again and really taken it somewhere really silly in terms of fame and money. But at the time, that was just terrifying to me. So I kind of went into hiding for about 6 or 7 years, which was obviously not helped by a 3-year court case, blah, 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 blah. But it was absolutely essential. I think it's one of the reasons I'm still sane today.
Hampered by the lack of promotion, Listen Without Prejudice only sold 4 million copies, a fraction of Faith's 12 million. Relations with his record company Sony became strained and reached breaking point when George decided to take them to court, claiming that the contract he had signed as a teenager effectively handcuffed him to the record label for the rest of his career. George wanted out, and the David and Goliath court case commenced in London's High Court in October 1993.
The law is on the side of who's legally right. And Sony had George pretty well wrapped up.
I'd always known, and everybody knew, that there was a huge discrepancy in the business between where these contracts had come from, which was the 30s, and the deals with Paramount and then CBS and studio deals, basically. And they were made in the same way, whereby artists were owned lock, stock and barrel by the record company.
The music business had changed, the contracts hadn't. So fairness demanded that Sony release George from this contract.
I mean, Sony is Sony, and going up against them was both brave and stupid. I mean, it's just the way that it is. But he felt that he was being pushed into a corner, and he wasn't going to take it anymore.
He fought for what he believed in, and that you can't put any person down for going for what they believe in. If you feel that strong about something, you know, then you have to go for it.
I understood that George had been provoked by a slur from an American record executive. And if indeed what I had heard was true, then anybody would want to be off the label.
The winner-takes-all case lasted an incredible 2 years.
I lost everything, absolutely lost disastrously, and I genuinely will never believe that that was kosher.
I am shocked and extremely disappointed at the judgment of Mr. Justice Parker. There is no such thing as resignation for an artist in the music industry.
If the law had been properly followed, I would have won my case. You know, restraint of trade. You can't sign people for 30 years to, you know...
In the end, the case was resolved in a way that most of us in the business thought it would be. That is to say, George did not get released, but Sony wanted to release him. Because nobody wants to have an unhappy artist on the list, an artist who's going to make the air foul. We all remember Prince saying at the Berlin MTV Awards, "God bless George Michael." George had become a symbol of independence. Artists supported him. What an embarrassment to Sony. Sure, they were legally correct, but they were embarrassed by having him.
All it really did was absolutely blacklist me here in America, and take 3 years out of my career in the rest of the world. Would I have been clever not to do it? Yes. But if I had not done these things, I would have remained very, very high profile in America, and I would have had to go through everything I went through in full glare. So, you know, terrible, terrible period of my life, but all, you know, like everything else, you learn great lessons from it, you know.
George was signed to a new label, but still took 3 years to release his next album, Older. Older was a mature and pensive work, but unfortunately proved another commercial disappointment, its sales clearly hampered by his long hiatus away from performing. However, all this seemed inconsequential when George's beloved mother, Leslie, suddenly fell ill with an aggressive strain of cancer. Tragically, Leslie died shortly after her diagnosis, and George broke down completely.
That was more of a loss than I could ever have believed. And it kind of came out of nowhere. So yeah, I felt quite sorry for myself for a bit, you know. I was not really, I was not a happy puppy for a while.
I did call him then and try to talk to him at that time, but it was very hard to even, at that time, hold a conversation. That things had gotten so out of hand, and rightly so, you know.
I always think that life is divided into two sets of people who have lost and people who haven't yet, you know. And the day that you really lose, is the day you become an adult, a real, true adult.
George Michael had been one of the biggest stars in the world, but after 2 disappointing albums, a court case, and the untimely death of his mother, was this the end?